Greatness. Greatness. Bow, bow, bow. Greatness.
There are 2 times to be great: when you feel like it and when you don't. Welcome to the Renewing the Mind podcast. I'm your host, Pastor Tyler Sanchez, and with me is my dad, Dr. Raul Sanchez. What's up, Dad?
Feeling amazing today, baby. A bison saying that we always go by, and it goes like this: those who stay will play. Those who play will be champions. Once a champion, always a champion.
And there's the ring kiss.
Yes, you know you love it.
This is our first episode ever. This has been a 3-year climb. Trying to get to this point feels a little bit surreal, huh?
Yeah, it's really weird. That first time we tried this in the office when you're trying to run camera, trying to do everything, and we'd start talking and I'd start flowing, and then you go, wait, hold up, the camera's off. And I'd be like, I broke it. And just having a team is much better than just like trying to run around and do everything.
Yeah, so this episode is going to be a little bit about who we are, what got us to this point, and then the 3 pillars of the Renewing the Mind Clinic, and then obviously into this podcast. And on audio is one of our team members, Bryce Armstrong, and on camera is another team member named Nate Castillo. So they are behind the scenes making all this work as we hopefully bring you something that will teach you how to flip your mindset by talking through how you can renew your perspective, move towards uncertainty, and find what's awesome about that in every situation. And before we jump into today's content, we want to go through a little segment we call WHAT?
What?
It's an acronym for what's awesome about that. You got a what moment for this week?
Yeah, actually, this is real life stuff, and we're going to try to do real life. Literally 8:58 this morning, Tavian, he is a 19-year-old down at Creighton University down in Omaha. He's our 3rd son. He sent me and Stacy a text, and it goes like this. I quote, "1 year ago today, I was on Creighton's campus for the very first time interviewing for the honors program, just to see if I got in, and I was still very sad about UChicago. But here we are, and now I'm living in God's promise of everything I wanted in a campus." And this is so huge because Tavian's dream is to be a neuroscientist, be a physician and researcher, things like this. And his number one goal, we talk about doing a reach school. So he applied to some schools that he knew he could get into, and we're just looking for a financial blessing, but he tried for some reach schools, which was University of Chicago, and also Johns Hopkins. And he kind of got waitlisted on UChicago. We had some second interviews, some second round of stuff. And in all honesty, he got bubbled. So they didn't let him in right away. They're kind of holding him a little bit like that. And during that prayer time, we were all praying, and we're moving toward uncertainty. We're moving as if he's going to Chicago. In prayer time, the Lord told me to tell him, hey, you're supposed to apply at Creighton. And he ignored it. And then we went and visited North Dakota State, and we got a great package from them. And on the way home, I'm like, hey, the Lord won't let this go. You're supposed to go to Creighton. And reluctantly, he went. And at the time, he wasn't happy. Him and I went down. He actually had Creighton listed 5th with some other schools. After that, we're driving home, and he's like, okay, I'm not going to lie, Dad. He was like, Creighton just bumped to number 2. Okay? So, which Mom's like, wait, above Evangel? And Tavian's like, yeah, Mom. So then after that weekend, what he's talking about, which is literally 1 year ago today, after that honors interview, him and a psychology professor clicked. They went over time and just talked about basic stuff like what do you do in your free time, and kind of just got to know each other. And him and Tavian talked about growing up with a psychologist and stuff, and they connected. On that way home, Tavian's like, I think Creighton's number 1, right? And even when he got accepted to Johns Hopkins, it didn't take over Creighton. Which was amazing to me because he's always thought about UChicago first, then it was Johns Hopkins. So to see something that was on the radar that God put on, and he didn't even see it, and now he's there, and in this midst, he's able to say, wow, what's awesome about that? Okay? So this is the concept. Like, he wasn't happy, he didn't want to go. Now he's there looking back, sifting through the pieces. He can see what is so amazing about that entire process, even to the point of not getting into his number 1 school.
Right.
Okay.
And it hasn't been easy for him.
And it hasn't been
He's
easy.
there without a car.
Correct.
He has to Uber to church.
He has to Uber to church. We Venmo him cash because he's so swamped, Yeah. So it's a lot of headache at some points. But the research pieces, the study pieces, the professors, he has an opportunity to work with a world-class professor. It's on the down low right now just because he's still working through that process. But
Sweet.
It's pretty awesome.
Cool. Hopefully every week we'll bring you a what moment.
What,
We
what?
Ask ourselves what's awesome about that. Basically finding the silver lining in every situation you're in. This week, like I said, we're going to talk about our stories. Then we'll finish it up with the 3 pillars of the Renewing the Mind Clinic, which you obviously are the psychologist at, and then how that applies to this podcast. And so you want to go first? Tell us a little bit who you are.
Yeah. So basically, I was born in Corpus Christi, Texas. My dad literally shot himself. So I know that's going to be a harsh thing to grab right away, but you need to understand that concept because that's who I was. Basically, my mom had 3 father/figures, boyfriends.
Hold on. How old were you when he committed suicide?
It was before I was 3, so I was 2. So we came up to Sioux City, moved with my grandma. My grandma had a restaurant called Ruth's Cocina. At that time, it was called other things, but we grew up really poor, grew up with some alcoholic stepfather figures who were my mom's boyfriends. Literally, there's a thing called an ACE study, which talks about trauma. Those of you who know that, you can understand the score, but my ACE score is an 8 to maybe 9. So to be honest, it's probably 8.5, which if you have an ACE score, you're raised with a ton of trauma. And so growing up with that trauma.
What's like an average ACE score?
An average ACE score. So 61% have an ACE score of 1. And basically, like, to get a score, like, you're afraid of getting hit by your dad. You've witnessed your mom or somebody in your family get beat up physically in your own house.
So all those different things give
all
you
those
a
different things.
point or half
Correct.
point adding
Yeah.
up to.
If you're raised by an alcoholic, that's another one. If your parent or loved one has attempted or committed suicide, that's another one. And so if you add those up, that's what we look at, is to see how much mental damage somebody took. Okay, so for me to have a score of an 8 or a 9, roughly in there, is really, really difficult to manage and understand from where I sit now. And so the concept of renewing the mind is, how do you go from being an 8 to now teaching people how to knock down that score over time? And the reason you're here and the reason we're doing this podcast is because at age 16, this beautiful lady named Stacy, I'm pretty sure you know her, she wouldn't leave me alone. She'd chase me all over the place, just saying,
No, she's going to listen to this, right?
Oh, wait, we're not just having a conversation?
No.
Literally, I chased her
Those are
down.
lies.
But long story short, we realized she was pregnant the end of spring semester, sophomore year. And so coming around to our junior year, I turned 17, Christmas break. Tyler Curtis Sanchez is born December 28th, 1987.
If you didn't know.
Yeah. So my football number was 28 for a reason, and it brought me my why. So instead of just me taking care of me and me being selfish about trying to figure out what I want and when I wanted it, I took on a couple of jobs, and I really focused on being a dad, and it really broke me. And the weirdest thing in the world is I had this fear of, like, leaving and infecting you how I did, which is I wasn't raised by my dad. And a lot of times, that comes up when you're in bed, you're laying down, you're just sleeping in this dead time when you really can't do anything, you can't move. It's really hard for somebody with trauma to sit still because all those thoughts come back. And so you move literally to get busy. But if you move with a purpose, then you change your brain, which is, like, that's why exercise is so important. Cross-lateral exercise, moving your arms and legs. That's why moving is so important. But what really pushed me is, like, I just want to be there for you because I didn't want to infect you with this fatherlessness, curse that I had. And so that pushed me to become a better father. And so it's really hard to grasp, but Stacy's in high school, I'm in high school. You stayed with Fran, which is my mother-in-law, your grandma, and you stayed with her during the day, and Stacy and I went to school. Then after school, Stacy worked at Orange Julius sometimes, then I would grab you after practice, and then all week long, Stacy and Fran juggled you around, and then every weekend I grabbed you. And Stacy worked on the weekends and took some, slept or whatever. But the crazy thing is she kept on her goals, which was to go to Evangel. I kept on my goals, which is to get a college scholarship, because being on welfare, having 6 kids, one mom who's fighting through to get off of welfare by working 3 jobs, we can't afford college. So for us to kind of parallel our lives with each other and both chase down a goal, at the time we got to our senior year, we were still dating, still raising you together. But the idea of her leaving and going to Evangel and me going to some university because I was being recruited by big schools, I couldn't let her go. So that their process kind of clicked with her. So I asked her to get married. We get married. Literally, here's how I went down. I graduated. I literally gave my life to the Lord because at 16 I knew about Jesus and I was working really hard to understand it, but I couldn't get my head wrapped around the fact that he's a dad. my father, because that whole thing is hurting me, hurtful to me. So you just judge Jesus as the way I judge my own dad's, right? So I didn't have that strength to kind of make that leap of faith or trust that God would be there. But I knew enough to see Stacy and her family and how they acted compared to us, my family. And so I made that, graduated, I got saved. I played in the Iowa Shrine game, which was an all-star running back at North High School here in Sioux City. And then we got married, and then we were in a trailer moving to North Dakota State to play football, me, you, and Mom. So we have two 18-year-olds, we're married, we got this little kid, and we're moving into married student housing. You still remember the apartment, don't you?
Yeah, 91B.
Yeah, so that's my side of the story.
Cinder block, white walls. It was like a prison.
Yes, it was. It was like old military like bunker stuff. Like
Rubber black stairs.
Yes, correct. So that's my part of this story. You tell your side.
So obviously you just heard how I came into this world, and I just
What?
so one of the couple things that I just want to make note of or like talk about is, I always say I'm going to write a book that says Raised by Kids, and just hearing some of the stories, looking back on it now when I have kids, it's just wild to think. Number one, being 18, with a 1.5 or 2-year-old, I just, I feel and I empathize with what you guys went through, going through college and all of that without a kid, without being married. And now looking back, it's kind of like one of those things you don't really know until you're in it.
Correct.
And you see that now that I have kids, to be able to see what you guys actually did, to break all statistics and to blaze a trail for us, my brothers and in Valencia. But, so I remember like at NDSU going into the locker room and eating pizza and pop.
After the
and
games.
then everyone started getting butt naked. So you'd make me face your locker. And you're like, don't turn around. Don't turn around. And all these massive, huge football players are walking by. And you're like, face the locker rooms. I'm just facing the locker room.
Yes, for real.
Now I look back, I'm like, oh, okay, I understand why.
And then I put you on the bench, and those big, huge 50-gallon garbage cans filled with pop. I'd put one in front of you, and you'd sit there and eat your pizza. Face the barrel, bro. Face the barrel.
I just remember sitting there, and people would be putting their nasty feet next to me, cutting off their tape.
Yes, correct.
I thought it was cool.
Correct. It was so dope.
It's actually pretty much torture now that I say it out loud. But
Everybody
I
loved
remember
you.
that. Like I could ride a bike at 2.5 years old.
Correct.
I could rollerblade.
No training wheels, by the way. 2.5 years old.
At 3, I could hit a ball from you pitching it to me.
You could hit a curve ball.
Like I couldn't read until I was like in 4th grade though. So
I got dyslexia, bro. I'm trying.
it was like all sports and fun and seriousness.
You played up
was
like 2 years in all your sports, and you was like behind in reading.
Yeah, I couldn't read. That's actually not a joke, but
yeah.
And then like some of the things I used to do, like when I was probably 4, you used to not let me get out of bed until 10 a.m.
Yes.
So I got to sleep in because you guys were like 19 years old.
Yeah.
Not wanting to get up early.
It's the only day we could sleep in because we were both doing full-time college and raising you, and I'm playing full-time football at North Dakota State.
But listen to this. This is what I had to do. So at 10 o'clock, the alarm went off. Or when I saw my alarm say 10 o'clock, I could go downstairs. And then my mom would set out on my little tyke table cereal in a bowl with a spoon there. And then I would open the fridge, and there'd be a little measured out cup of milk. And then I would pour my milk into my own cereal bowl. And then you guys would set the TV on the cartoon channel for Saturday morning cartoons.
Yep.
And I'd turn the TV on already on my channel with the volume. And I would sleep for another half hour.
Yeah, we usually
That's torture. That's DHS. Someone needs to call and get me removed.
We set your alarm for 10. We set ours for 10:30, but because I gave you 30 minutes just.
That's
for
when
chill.
your alarm went off, though.
That's
You
when
didn't
our
get
alarm
out of bed, though.
Correct. That was before I had a really good, resilient morning routine, so I would hit snooze. So we'd probably get downstairs at 11, maybe 11:15.
You know what's amazing is that I'm here today.
True.
And I'm alive.
Yeah.
No,
But that's why you were in a military barracks. You couldn't hurt yourself. Like big old steel, big old walls. Like you couldn't escape.
I can't imagine doing that to my daughter.
Yeah.
She's 4.
I thought about this. When you turned 30, you called me and you were golfing with Tim and Paul. And you're like, Dad. I'm like, yeah, what's up? And you're like, just got done golfing with Tim and Paul. I'm like, yeah, what's up? And you're like, bro, we're 30. We're all just talking about being 30. I'm like, yeah, okay. And you're like, but we're 30. I'm like, I don't understand.
I remember.
You're like, we just thought about this when we came to Sergeant Bluff, 1999. You said you were 30. I'm like, yeah. And that's when I thought you grabbed the capacity. You're like, dude.
That's when it started.
You had a PhD. You had me at 18.
Yeah, you had a 12-year-old.
You had a
You had
12-year-old.
a sixth grader.
A sixth grader, and you're starting to process all that stuff. You're like,
Nah.
dude, I just turned 30.
No way.
So I started my climb super early, just what happens.
No. I mean, that was early childhood. We moved around. You went to Iowa City to get your, master's and PhD.
Correct.
Then Des Moines to do your, residency?
Yep.
Or whatever you call it.
Yep.
And then, Des Moines was a really rough year for me just because we knew that we were only going to be there for a year.
Right.
We lived in that little tiny apartment.
Right.
We
had
drove
a
this.
pool.
We drove this car called the Hoopty,
For real.
and this thing was jankety, dude.
The color was rust.
The back doors wouldn't open.
Yes.
The remember the roof inside didn't have the
carpet.
The carpet, so it was just foam, and there's people's
Yes.
names like I Love Betsy.
Yes.
And Frank was here.
That's why you and Mom had to drive it, because sometimes driving that downtown to Des Moines, I would just, reach my hand to get something, and that junk would fall on me, and it looked like I had like yellow
Can you
dandruff.
imagine dropping off Terrence and Tave in that thing?
They had to seriously ask it to be parked 5 years, but you hated it too. You're like, why can't we take the
Yeah,
van?
and guess what you said? I didn't have a car when I was your age.
That's how
I walked to
Bro.
walked to school both
I
ways.
literally rode my bike
Uphill.
everywhere.
Barefoot.
Correct. I wasn't barefooted though. I had shoes on.
I think one of the biggest moments in my life that obviously we're Christians, we believe in Jesus has a plan for all of us. I just remember moving here. I had a hat on that had Jesus graffitied on the front of it.
Yeah,
I
correct.
got made fun of a lot for that in sixth grade, but I kind of fought through all of it. Remember hanging out with my buddies, that weren't Christians or didn't have a Christian home, and every time something questionable would come up, I would just call you guys to come get me, or I'd ride
Correct.
my bike home. And then in seventh grade, I remember there was a Friday night they were getting ready to watch South Park, which, I don't know what people think on South Park, but at that point, that was like a really terrible show for me to watch.
Yeah, we told you couldn't.
Yeah, and so normally up until that point for the last year, I'd call you guys, hey, they're going to watch South Park, or I'm going to ride my bike home. And I just remember in that moment, I was just like, nah, I think I'm just going to stay, and so my buddies were like, what are you doing? You normally always go home. And in that moment, there was something that switched in my mindset that was I just wanted to see, like what kind of going outside of your parameters that you established for me felt like, pushing the limits. And then from seventh grade till my junior year at college was that, pushing the limits on what you guys established for me and also what God had for me in my life. And,
Right.
and kind of running from a call that I had. I always felt like, I don't want this to sound arrogant or cocky, but I always felt like I just had a different influence than people around me. And so I was scared of that and running from that, in high school. It was easy for me to kind of persuade my friends and, some students to do something good or to do something bad both ways. I don't know.
That's
I just
because
ran from it.
ever since you were in preschool, every teacher you've ever had would pull us over and say, Tyler is the smartest kid in the class,
Facts.
and he has the most amount of influence that they've seen in any other student in years. The problem is he influences in the wrong way. And some of that is on
Being
me.
bad's fun.
Yeah, but some of that's on me because I taught you how to fart, not be ashamed of it. I taught you how to do armpit farts and just crazy stuff like that. And, and then plus all my buddies from NDSU would come over. The first thing you would do is punch them and be like, bro, what's up?
Right.
You wouldn't be like,
That doesn't fly in
"Hi,
third grade in
I'm
classroom."
Tyler. Right. And so you always got in trouble for throwing elbows and stuff. And I'm like, but that's how he says hi. And these people are like, he needs to see a psychologist. Like, he's aggressive. And I'm
Did
like,
you tell him you were one?
no, at that time I was in athletic training. So I was like, what do you mean see a psychologist? Like, that dude's dope.
So I'm the reason you went into psychology.
That's part of it.
So you don't have to pay the weekly
Yeah.
copay of sending me to a psychologist.
Yeah, I went to. I was in criminal justice at the time. I switched from athletic training. Then I went to architecture because that was a childhood dream to be Peter Brady's dad. And then I went into criminal justice because I liked the idea of working and rehabbing criminals kind of thing. And I heard a criminal psychologist, a forensic guy, talk about retired guy from the FBI talking about profiling people. And that dude hooked me, so I switched to psychology. But that wasn't until my sophomore year.
Yep.
So a lot of your troubles were right when we got there, that early on, because you were pretty aggressive.
Yep.
But I raised no little crybaby though. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, we heard. I had to get my own cereal at 3.
Correct. Look at you,
Barely made it.
killing it.
I barely made it. No, then I went to college, lived the non-Christian college life, went to Evangel University, did the same thing, kind of drank and partied. And then one day I just literally cried out to God and just said, I'm tired of doing this on my own. I'm tired of running. You know, I literally verbally said out loud, call me to be, and no offense to anyone that collects trash, but I just started naming off a bunch of people. I said, call me to be a garbage man, call me to be a teacher, call me to be, I just wanted God to just, I just always told you, you know, like if God can heal the blind and make the lame walk, why can't he just say, do this? This is your calling. And I hated that. I just felt like, you know, in that moment, I just felt like God was hiding. And in reality, it was that I wasn't seeking after God. And so the desires of my heart and what God was speaking towards me, I wasn't even able to hear that because I'm not in that state to do that. But in that moment, I just felt like God said full-time ministry. And I prayed for 3 confirmations. And over the next week, I got 3 different people, 2 that I had no idea. One that night just said, whatever you're asking God for, the answer is yes. He said, I don't know what it is, but it's yes. Mm-hmm. Later on that week, I had a guy at chapel come up to me across the chapel, and he just said, hey, I don't know who you are. He said, but I felt like during worship, God was supposed to come over and tell me that you're going to do amazing things for God. No idea who he was. Later on that week, another guy just said, hey, I know that God's got a calling upon your life. One of my biggest concerns was money, you know, growing up. I mean, we didn't grow up poor, but we weren't like thriving in money, you know?
Yep.
And so one of the concerns I had was just money. So I wanted to go into business. I wanted to go into marketing. And then I wanted to get my master's in sports marketing. And then I wanted to get a Porsche that on my license plate said 2.0 GPA.
Yes.
And so
you still say that today.
Yeah, I'm not going to get a Porsche, but I want a truck. And I want to put it on my big Toyota
2.0
Tundra.
GPA 2.0.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
But, you know, so those things.
Then I'll get a sticker that says my son's a 2.0.
Right. Be proud. I'm a rocket.
Yeah, big old fist bump.
It is what it is. But, you know, so those things were running through my head. You know, like the second I heard ministry, I heard poor.
Right.
You know, I heard struggling pastor. And so I began to think of all those things. And this dude just came up to me and was like, hey, he's like, whatever God's calling you to do, he will provide everything for you. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, I don't know what you're dealing with, but he's like, whatever God will provide. Right. And I was like, wait, are you reading my mind? You know, like what's happening?
Yeah.
So I asked for 3, and within that week, God confirmed those. Then later on that semester, I went to Italy, and I walked through the door into a house church, and this lady, I had no idea who she was. She just said, hey, are you Tyler? Like, they didn't know who we were.
Correct.
We were a missions team in Italy. And I said, yeah. And she said, she gave me a sheet of paper that I still have in my office. And just had a list of all these things. Just said, like, you're going to change the world for Jesus. God's got a calling on your life that's different than other people. You're going to impact the nation for the kingdom of God. You're going to do great things. And the last thing she said was, like, if you're faithful and trust him. So I asked for 3. God gave me 4. So from that moment on, just began to go into full-time ministry. Got out of college, asked my wife, Alicia, to marry me, went to Montezuma, Iowa, pastor there for 3.5 years, and then moved here to Sioux City, Morningside Assembly of God, and been pastor there going on 4.5. So,
yeah,
which is crazy, dude. June will be 5 years we've been here.
Yeah, and there'll be another time for your story about like how you even came here, but I want to go back because that situation, there's 2 pieces that happened right before you got called. You got your 3 calls to ministry. So I firmly believe all of us have inside of us this will, this unbreakable will that the Lord has put inside of us. But it only ignites in the direction that God has pushed you in. So for me, ever since I was a kid, I've always just black and white on this concept that we would call double standard, or this concept that we now as a family call congruent. Like I say I'm going to do something, then behind the scenes I don't do it. We say, oh, that dude's not congruent, right? Sure. I saw that black and white since I was a young kid. I could discern friends. I could discern dads. I could do all that, right? So my number one piece is I'm not conforming to people who aren't congruent. And so I just will not conform, right? So I will not be broken in that sense. Like nothing can ever break me. I can get stuck. I can struggle. I could fail. I could do all these things. But that piece has always been me. For you, you've always would say things like, but God. Right? I remember I shouldn't say all, but a lot of your mentors who are Christians would tell you things like, well, there's certain places God doesn't want you to go. And you're like, I get it. But if you do go there, God could still rescue you. And you're like, there's a lot of, you'd always get in struggles with people because you, in my opinion, your faith was bigger than some of your like adult leaders. Sure. Okay. So now your faith was even bigger than mine and your mom's and a couple of our friends when we went down to Branson. Remember, so we were in Branson because we'd always take a vacation to Branson. as we moved you into Evangel.
Yeah,
every
you visit
single
me
year.
one time a year.
Sorry, bro.
3 days after I
Remember,
went
we
to college.
struggled. That's all we could afford at the time.
Jeez.
Here's the thing. Listen, we are all in this huge hot tub, right? It's you and like 6 adults, okay? And you're like, I just want God to put, Tyler, you're going to be a psychologist, or Tyler, you're going to be a police officer.
Yeah, I
Remember?
called it my billboard.
You said, and that's right. You called it a billboard. You're like, I just want God to put it on the billboard one by one. Sometimes I just went, Tyler. Sometimes you just got to stop conforming to your friends, because see, that's my thing, right?
Right.
Stop what you're doing, start moving toward what you want to do, and we'll figure it out, right? Okay. So then Mom gives you her spiel, and then a couple of our friends give you their spiel, right? And then at the end, you left with your head down, and I remember feeling bad because I told Stacy, I said, we shouldn't have been so hard on him. Okay. I don't know if you remember the other part. We're dropping you off, and I found out you're downloading songs illegally off of Napster.
Whoa, allegedly.
Okay, bro.
The government.
Just like Mom says, we don't miss a thing. Okay, so I figured that
Shout
out.
out to Napster and LimeWire.
Yeah, sorry. Anyways, hope there's no like statute of limitations.
Yeah,
or something.
yeah.
Getting
It was
busted.
allegedly I did.
Yeah. Maybe it was you, maybe it wasn't.
Yeah.
Okay, but we got in this big argument, remember?
Yeah,
And
I
I'm
remember.
telling you, God's not going to bless you if you continue to steal stuff. And so you're like, it's not stealing. Like everybody does it. It's just out there on the internet for
Borrowing.
everybody. Whatever, right?
Listen to it a couple times and send it back.
Yeah. So we're in that big argument, right? And at the very end, we circle up and we moved your stuff in, right? We circle up. We always do when we pray. Then me and you did like this one-arm bro hug instead of that full chest hug. And Mom's
Yeah.
like, you need a hug. And you just start walking. She's like, go chase him down, hug him. I'm like, nah, we're good. Love you, Ty. Like I get in the truck mad. You take off mad.
Yeah, I
right?
was heated.
That wasn't a good spot. Then you were procrastinating for something, and then one of your boys told you to go down to.
No, I had a paper due the next day.
Yeah, and then you had to go downstairs. So you procrastinated. You went down to this like prayer worship service down in the lobby or something.
Yep.
And then we got a phone call hours later that you're bawling, and you're like, the Lord woke you up and gave you your billboard, right?
Yep.
And it's coming out of all that stress. See, look, here's what people don't understand. Sometimes there's all these little wreckages, and then people say, well, because of that happened, I'm not going to go now. Now I'm going to quit. Now I'm going to punt. Now I'm going to just drop out. And you just kept moving. And this is why I tell people all the time, if you just continue to move, things happen. If you just continue to press in, things happen. So even though you moved for the wrong purpose,
Right.
you were procrastinating.
Still going.
You still went.
Right.
So that's the backstory.
Yeah,
of
I
that
went to
time.
the Bible study to avoid writing my paper.
Exactly. 2.0 truck, right?
Yeah, that's right. Rough, dude. All right, any other parts of your story you want to hit on, or
No, I think that's good for now.
okay?
That's a
I'm
good
sure throughout the rest of the episodes on the podcast, we'll keep coming back to our stories. But the last thing we're going to discuss today is just the 3 pillars of Renewing the Mind Clinic,
Yeah.
which then obviously translates into
Right.
to this podcast. So obviously, they're renew your perspective, move towards uncertainty, and ask yourself what's awesome about that
Right.
in every situation.
So back in 2004, I felt like the Lord was moving me in my current office at the time, and I felt like maybe He might even pull me out of psychology. I didn't know, and so I was just praying and fasting. And Romans 12:2, which at the time my standing verse has been Philippians 13:14, different piece, but basically let go of everything that's in your past and press on toward the goal. That's been my life verse, and the Lord switched it with me with 12:2. So Romans 12:2 goes like this. There's 3 parts, okay? Part 1 is do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, first. The second piece is be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Part 3, so that you can find and approve, and some versions say test and approve, that which is the perfect and pleasing will of God. And that He has a perfect and pleasing will for each of us. But none of us get there because we don't stop conforming. We do what other people are doing.
Right.
Like,
What's the norm?
right. So at North Dakota State, I wanted to go into athletic training, but once I realized that wasn't me, I'm like, nah, I don't want to do this. I just started going with, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? Somebody mentioned architect. I was like, oh yeah, I love Peter Brady. Like, I like to draw. Like, and I'm like, no, that doesn't work. What do you do? Like, what do you do? If like 7 of my buddies were doing criminal justice, so I'm like, okay, maybe that's me. So I just moved into that, right? So we just start conforming until you really ask yourselves deep questions. I didn't know how to do that really good, only being like 19.
Right.
So I just kind of pushed through that. But these 3 pieces, right? Stop conforming. Second piece is you have to transform by renewing your mind. Third piece, find what God's perfect will is for you. So we moved those into 3 action steps, which is we're going to renew your perspective, like stop conforming and figure out who you are, renew your perspective. Number 2 is you're going to move. Transforming is a process. I have to move, right? Then the third step is now I get to find what's awesome about making that move. And we tie back to that what moment today when Tavian's now able to find. And listen, when you get to step 3, finding what's awesome about those pieces, those situations, it solidifies the other 2. So now looking back, he's able to go, that's why he was moving me toward Creighton. Right. And then he's going, yes, and that's why he changed my perspective on, man, I'm a failure because I didn't get into UChicago.
Sure.
And even then, getting into John Hopkins. He didn't get into Hopkins, and that didn't even help him. I mean, when he got into Hopkins, it didn't help him. He was like, yeah, that's cool. Right? It wasn't even like such a big deal because he was still mourning. And this is the concept. Like, if you figure out those 3 steps and you know where you're at, we can identify where you're at. We can put this game plan, and we win. Right? That's the winning mindset. So that is Romans 12:2. That is renewing the mind.
So everything we do here on this podcast is going to run through those 3 pillars. Sweet. Well, we're going to end the show with this. As Marshawn Lynch said, manage y'all mentals.
Take care of y'all mentals. Go take care of y'all mentals.
Will you give us a takeaway or an action step on how we manage our mentals this week?
Your very first step is stop conforming. Everyone's trying to change the behavior while they still do their old one. So the very first thing you got to do is stop what you're doing. If you're doing some bad habit, just stop it and give yourself like 72 hours to not do it. Try the best you can not to do it and just let your mind kind of rush through. Now, a piece to that is go to our YouTube channel, Renew the Mind Clinic. Watch this video we dropped called The 6 Stages of Change, because once you stopped conforming, now you can identify what step you're in. There's 6 stages there mentally, and if you can identify a mental step, change happens in the thought process first, and then your body just lives out that mental change. Okay. Everybody's trying to push these physical changes, and none of it happens until the mental changes goes first. So you manage your mental moment, stop conforming.
So before we leave here and you continue with your morning, afternoon, or evening, we just want to let you know once again there's 2 times to be great: when you feel like it and when you don't. Make sure you tune in next week as we talk about failing in 2020. What happens if you've already failed in 2020? What happens if your 2020 has already been a big L? We're going to discuss that. And if anything we've said today spoke to you at any level, please leave us a review on this podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, and ring that bell. And then in the comments below, just leave us a comment on what you thought of today's episode. Maybe you got some questions that we've said or anything along the lines of Renewing the Mind Clinic or our stories or the 3 pillars. We'd love to just kind of interact with you in the comments section. Before we go, don't forget to renew your perspective, move towards uncertainty, and find what's awesome about that in every situation. We love you guys. We'll see you next week.
Peace.
I had to realize what's inside of me. For all of the people that lied to me, for all of the people that said I would fall off. Oh boy, what a time to be alive. I wrote this for everyone, feel like they counted out. You need to look in the mirror and tell yourself it's time to be who I am now. Greatness.